If a white Home Secretary said what she said about Asian men or about the small boats, I'm pretty sure we would have gone in much harder. I've been looking at polling all week about whether or not people think that gollywog dolls are racist. And I mean, I cannot understand why opinion polling on whether or not something is racist is so heavily weighted towards white people. It's just bizarre. It's not much point asking me whether or not something is racist unless I am at least au fait with the victimhood of racism. It's quite bizarre that. I think someone picked up on it, that last time they did it, they separated out ethnic minority attitudes. You want to know whether something is racist? Surely the only people who are properly qualified to answer that question are the people who are the victims of the racism, the alleged racism, and then the rest of us should listen to them. I don't need some, old white pub bore to tell me that gollywogs aren't racist. There it is. You've got someone in, I forget precisely where, claiming that it's not remotely racist and that he wore a Britain First T-shirt by accident. Like, we've all done that. Who here hasn't got out of bed, pulled on a T-shirt and then accidentally worn a garment that is associated with the far right? But definitely not a racist. No. Nothing racist about it. It's all pictures of gollywogs being lynched. A little line saying they used to lynch them in Mississippi. No, not racist at all. Just an accidental T-shirt wearer. It's just pathetic. And of course, inevitably, given that so much of the media is about pushing provocation and we're going to have an argument and the Daily Mail's going to commission. And I'll say this because this is exactly the topic that we're about to go into. The Daily Mail will find one of the only black people in the country that doesn't think gollywogs are racist to write an article about why gollywogs aren't racist. I don't know whether they did that, but you know that they would do. You know that is... And then they'll pop up on one of those weird new television channels claiming to speak for their entire ethnicity when in fact they speak only for themselves. And that is part of the problem I have when we turn our attention to Sayeeda Warsi's week, which began on this programme on Tuesday with, you could probably tell if you watched the clip, I was quite surprised by how far she went. You've got to phrase the question very carefully. At least I, as a white man, feel you have to phrase the question very carefully when asking whether or not Suella Braverman, in this case, received some form of cover by dint of her own ethnicity. If a white Home Secretary said what she said about Asian men or about the small boats, I'm pretty sure we would have gone in much harder. I'm using the royal we there. I mean I'm pretty sure I would have gone in much harder. I tried a tweet about a few months ago where I just expressed the difficulty I have understanding how children of people who've come here from overseas can harbour such negative attitudes towards other people who want to come here from overseas. But I used the phrase children of immigrants, and that upset people. I was told by a slightly odd exchange with an Observer journalist that was itself racist because it is shorthand for people of colour. I didn't know that. I'm still not sure that I fully understand. How do I describe Dominic Raab, the son of a Czech refugee, who is part of a government that is adopting absolutely vicious attitudes towards refugees? I find it weird that the son of a refugee, I find it weirder for a son of a refugee to endorse these sort of policies than I do for the son of someone who wasn't a refugee. I just do. But it was an interesting experience of the importance of nuance, and also the fact that as a white bloke I have insights. I have different insights. I don't have the same insights as I would have had if I'd grown up with darker skin, with brown or black skin. I just don't. But what do you do then on this one? What do you do? What, as a white person, can you say, echoing what Sayeeda Warsi said on Tuesday? So Suella Braverman is indulging in racist rhetoric. She is behaving like a racist. She is, Warsi would claim, almost hiding behind her own ethnicity. She is insulated from the accusation of racism by being from a part of society that would be traditionally viewed as a potential victim of racism. She says herself today, whether this consistent use of racist rhetoric is strategy or incompetence, however, doesn't matter. Both show she is not fit to hold high office. My friend Satnam Sanghera, author of the absolutely brilliant Empire Land and Times columnist, goes a little further this morning. He says you can make it to the top in Britain. He obviously means Tory Britain. He means Britain under this conservative government, as a person of colour, as long as you agree to argue that racism is not a problem, as long as you're willing to propound actual racism in your politics. Warsi is right. It's not progress. It might even be the opposite of progress. And it's a brave piece, I think, for a former co-chair of the Conservative Party to have written. It is very, very strong. It won't get the coverage you'd expect because it is very uncomfortable reading for people who cheerlead for the current Conservative Party. And well, I don't think we need to explain that any further. I think I'm going to ask you whether you agree with Sayeeda Warsi. And then in the course of that conversation, I'm going to try to work out what a white person can and can't say, and whether or not a white person can go as far as Sayeeda Warsi. Because I'm not embarrassed to tell you that in the first instance, I am uncomfortable doing that. I really am. Braverman's own ethnic origin, this is Sayeeda's words, Braverman's own ethnic origin has shielded her from criticism for too long. Now, and by that, I don't mean idiots who say, if I criticise Suella Braverman, then some far-right wombat will call me racist. It's a bit like, if you say it's pretty bad to chain up rent boys to the wall in the context of something that Boy George was convicted for some years ago, that is not homophobic. So it's very bad to chain people to walls. That's not homophobic. And to say this is a disgusting policy or she's cackling in that photograph taken in Rwanda, you're not basing your criticism on her skin colour. But you are bringing her skin colour into it here. That's why I find it fraught territory. Braverman's own ethnic origin has shielded her from criticism for too long. That's it, isn't it? You just don't bring her skin colour into it. You talk about her and you treat her exactly as you would a white politician, expounding exactly the same policies. Maybe that's the first point of progress. And she goes on, Sayeeda Warsi goes on, many people within the Conservative Party have been hesitant to call out what has been staring members in the face. They struggle to hold an ethnic minority MP to account in the same way they would a white parliamentarian. This needs to change. If we are going to start to have honest conversations, let's start by saying this. Black and brown people can be racist too. Wow. And she takes aim at Rishi Sunak as well, saying that although he didn't use the same language as Braverman and he looked uncomfortable when he was questioned about it, as head of the party, the responsibility stops with him. As the first Prime Minister from an ethnic minority background, he should not want to be remembered for presiding over a government that engaged in racist rhetoric. So there's a lot here to get our teeth into. I think the perspective of people of colour will be of much, much more value, in the first instance at least, than the perspective of people from my ethnicity. I obviously have a profile of sorts, so I'm always conscious of sensitivity and the importance of nuance. But because Sayeeda Warsi is a very senior Conservative politician, a Baroness no less, who sits in the House of Lords, a former co-chair of the whole party, I am more comfortable talking about this than I would have been if this had come from critics of the government, if this had come from people who were not, if you like, on the same team, ostensibly. And that's a weakness on my part. That's a lack of courage, a lack of conviction on my part, which I'm going to try and fix in the course of the next hour with your help. So there it is. Braverman's own ethnic origin has shielded her from criticism for too long. Many people within the Conservative Party have been hesitant to call out what has been staring members in the face, not just within the Conservative Party, but within the media as well. Even relatively tireless critics of racism, and I'll allow myself in that category, are uncomfortable going after Suella Braverman or Kemi Badenoch as well. When that report was published claiming that there was no such thing as institutional racism, I'm not sure a white politician could have got away with that. I just don't think a white politician would have been as comfortable in the public space arguing that there's no such thing as racism when everybody knows that there is. So that takes us back to Satnam Sangira's point, which is you can only really get ahead under this Conservative government. You can only really end up on top under this Conservative government if you are prepared to argue that racism is not a problem and you are willing to propound actual racism in your politics. The way she talks about dreaming about refugees, it's just weird and slightly sick. Dreaming about refugees being deported against their will to a country they've quite possibly never heard of, a country with a record of shooting refugees who protest about things like food. It's just weird and it's sick. And it's obviously, in some way, shape or form, it's racist. And yet when I look at Suella Braverman, I see someone who, in my mind's eye, is much, much more likely to be a victim of racism than to be a proponent of it. Sayeeda Warsi sort of breaks the dam this week by saying, no, get off the fence. That's racist. You've got to say so. And I think she's right. Do you?